Okay, real talk. How many of you just toss pumpkin seeds in the trash every single October? Yeah, I see you. I was that guy too, honestly. I'd spend 20 minutes carving a pumpkin and just dump the seeds straight into the garbage bag like they were nothing. That was before I actually looked at the research on these things. Because here's the thing. I've been practicing medicine for over a decade now, and I don't say this lightly. Pumpkin seeds are genuinely one of the most underrated functional foods I've come across. Not a superfood in the Instagram influencer sense. Actual, peer-reviewed, published in real journals functional food. This week alone, I had a 58-year-old patient, type 2 diabetic, chronic insomnia, benign prostatic hyperplasia, basically the triple whammy. And I found myself recommending 3 different interventions that all pointed back to the same thing: a small handful of these seeds every day. So today we are going deep. Benefits, the real science behind each one, how much to eat, what form works best, and because I know someone in the comments will ask, yes, we're going to talk about when not to eat them and what the interactions look like. Stay with me to benefit number 4, because it's the one that surprises literally every patient I mention it to. Let's start with something that affects about 1 in 3 American adults right now: sleep disorders. The CDC estimates that roughly 70 million Americans have a chronic sleep problem, and the first thing most people reach for is melatonin, which, fine, it works for some folks, but there's a more interesting pathway that most people have never heard about. Pumpkin seeds are one of the most concentrated dietary sources of the amino acid tryptophan on the planet. We're talking about 570 milligrams per 100 grams, which beats chicken breast, beats turkey, yes, the famous Thanksgiving turkey, and is competitive with the highest tryptophan foods we know of. A study published in Nutritional Neuroscience in 2005 by Bhagya Devi Pukuri and colleagues actually tested pumpkin seed flour versus pharmaceutical-grade tryptophan for sleep quality in adults with mild insomnia. The pumpkin seed group, combined with carbohydrates, showed comparable improvement in sleep efficiency. Not quite as dramatic, but real, measurable, and here's the key: without side effects. Why does tryptophan help you sleep? The conversion chain goes: dietary tryptophan, 5-HTP, serotonin, melatonin. That last conversion happens in the pineal gland and only in the dark, which is actually a good reminder to put your phone down an hour before bed. But that's a different video. Now, the tryptophan story is only half of it. Pumpkin seeds are one of the single best dietary sources of magnesium in existence. 1 ounce, 28 grams, gives you approximately 150 milligrams of magnesium, covering nearly 37% of the daily recommended intake for an adult male. A landmark meta-analysis published in PLOS One in 2012 by Abbasi and colleagues analyzed 12 randomized controlled trials and concluded that magnesium supplementation had a statistically significant positive effect on sleep duration and sleep efficiency, particularly in elderly subjects and those with baseline magnesium deficiency. And here's something I want to address because I get this question a lot. Doc, if magnesium is so great for sleep, why don't you just take a supplement? You can. Magnesium glycinate before bed is actually something I recommend to patients in certain situations. But getting it through food means you're also getting zinc, iron, plant-based omega-3s, antioxidants, the whole package. The bioavailability story with whole food is almost always more complex and more favorable than an isolated supplement. That's my personal opinion, and I know some of my colleagues would push back on that, but that's where the evidence sits for me. Practical takeaway. If sleep is your main goal, eat a small handful, roughly 30 grams, about 2 hours before bed. Pair them with a small amount of carbohydrate, like a few crackers or a piece of fruit. The carbohydrate stimulates insulin, which helps tryptophan cross the blood-brain barrier. That's not a bro science trick. That's basic transport physiology. All right, moving to the cardiovascular system, and this is where pumpkin seeds start to look really impressive from a clinical standpoint. The magnesium content we just talked about is directly relevant here. Magnesium acts as a natural calcium channel blocker. It competes with calcium in smooth muscle cells lining your blood vessels, which causes those vessels to relax. Relaxed vessels mean lower peripheral resistance, which means lower blood pressure. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition published a study in 2010 showing that higher dietary magnesium intake was independently associated with lower systolic and diastolic blood pressure across a population of over 58,000 adults. But let me tell you about the fat profile of pumpkin seeds, because this is where it gets interesting. About 80% of the fat in pumpkin seeds is unsaturated, primarily oleic acid, the same heart-healthy fat in olive oil, and linoleic acid, an omega-6. Now, I know omega-6 has gotten a bad reputation in the wellness space, and I think that's, and this is my opinion, I'll own it, largely overstated when the omega-6 comes from whole food sources rather than industrial seed oils. Linoleic acid from whole pumpkin seeds in the context of a balanced diet behaves very differently from refined corn oil. A clinical trial published in Hypertension Research by Gossel Williams and colleagues actually supplemented postmenopausal women with pumpkin seed oil for 12 weeks and found significant reductions in diastolic blood pressure and improvements in HDL cholesterol, the good kind, compared to placebo. The mechanism? Those monounsaturated fats combined with phytosterols like beta-sitosterol, which compete with dietary cholesterol for absorption in the gut. Now let's talk blood sugar, because this is relevant to about 37 million Americans with diabetes and another 96 million with prediabetes. A pilot study published in the Journal of Diabetes and Metabolic Disorders in 2014 examined the glycemic response to pumpkin seed supplementation in people with type 2 diabetes and found meaningful improvements in fasting glucose levels over 8 weeks. The mechanism is threefold. The high fiber content slows glucose absorption in the small intestine. The protein content stimulates glucagon-like peptide 1, GLP-1, which is, fun fact, the same pathway that the newer diabetes drugs like semaglutide work on. And that magnesium again improves insulin receptor sensitivity at the cellular level. I'll be honest with you, the diabetes study was small. N of around 40. I'm not telling you to throw away your metformin and start eating pumpkin seeds. What I'm saying is that this is a powerful adjunct, a complementary tool, and the biological mechanisms are solid even when individual study sizes are modest. Okay, this is the one that gets the most reaction when I bring it up with patients, and I've now mentioned it to so many guys in their 50s and 60s that I've basically started keeping a little printed summary card to hand out, which, yes, my medical assistant made fun of me for, but here we are. Benign prostatic hyperplasia, or BPH, prostate enlargement, affects about 50% of men by age 60, and roughly 90% by age 85. If you've experienced it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Waking up at 2 a.m., again at 4 a.m., the weak stream, the urgency, it's genuinely quality of life disrupting. Pumpkin seeds contain two things that are remarkably targeted at this problem. The first is zinc, and the prostate has the highest zinc concentration of any organ in the human body. A healthy prostate needs zinc to regulate dihydrotestosterone, DHT, the androgen that drives prostate cell proliferation. When zinc levels drop, DHT activity increases and the prostate can enlarge. Several observational studies have linked higher dietary zinc intake to lower BPH risk. The second is a compound called cucurbitин, and this one is wild. A randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial published in the Journal of Medicinal Food in 2014 randomized 1,431 men with BPH to receive either pumpkin seed extract, Serenoa repens extract, a combination, or placebo for 12 months. All three active groups showed statistically significant improvement in International Prostate Symptom Score, IPSS, compared to placebo. The pumpkin seed group alone dropped their mean IPSS by about 30%. The researchers concluded that cucurbitin likely inhibits 5-alpha reductase, the same enzyme that finasteride blocks, so nature's version of a drug, essentially. Now, for the women watching, and statistically about half of you are, this applies to you too, just differently. A randomized controlled trial published in Complementary Medicine Research by Nishimura and colleagues in 2014 gave postmenopausal women either pumpkin seed oil or wheat germ oil for 12 weeks. The pumpkin seed group reported a significant decrease in overactive bladder symptoms, urgency, nocturia, urgency incontinence compared to the wheat germ group. The proposed mechanism involves phytoestrogens in the seed oil that may help maintain urethral and detrusor muscle tone. Look, I think the pumpkin seed prostate connection is probably the most clinically underutilized piece of nutritional medicine I know, not because it replaces medications for men who need them, but because it's safe, it has multiple mechanisms of action, and the evidence quality is actually pretty decent. That's my take. Now, so this is the benefit that patients almost never see coming. And I'm going to say up front, this one is a little more traditional medicine territory, meaning we have strong mechanistic data and historical use going back centuries, but the clinical trial evidence is thinner than for the other benefits. I want to be transparent about that. You deserve an honest risk-benefit analysis, not just hype. The compound cucurbitin, the same one we just talked about for the prostate, has a documented paralyzing effect on certain helminths, which is a fancy word for intestinal worms, tapeworms, roundworms, the whole unpleasant crowd. The mechanism, based on in vitro and animal studies, appears to be that cucurbitin interferes with the parasite's neuromuscular function, essentially paralyzing it so the gut can expel it. This was actually formally studied in China in the 1980s and 90s, with some interesting results in tapeworm infections, though the study designs were not what we'd call rigorous by modern standards. Now, I had a patient last year, a 34-year-old woman who'd been traveling extensively in Central America and came back with chronic GI symptoms that weren't resolving. After appropriate workup, we did identify a parasitic infection. She was treated with the standard pharmaceutical protocol, obviously. I'm not suggesting people skip actual anti-parasitic medication for pumpkin seeds, but she asked me about supportive nutritional strategies during recovery, and pumpkin seeds, along with other gut-supporting foods, were part of what I recommended for the maintenance phase. The gut health angle that's on much stronger scientific footing is the fiber story. 1 ounce of pumpkin seeds contains about 1.7 grams of fiber, and if you eat the shell, which you can, it's edible, that number goes up significantly. Dietary fiber feeds the beneficial bacteria in your colon, the lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species that are critical for immune regulation, serotonin production, short-chain fatty acid synthesis, and honestly, about 50 other things we're still figuring out. A review in Nature Reviews Gastroenterology and Hepatology, published in 2019, made a pretty compelling case that inadequate dietary fiber is one of the primary drivers of Western gut dysbiosis. Pumpkin seeds are one easy lever to pull. Bottom line on this benefit, the fiber and prebiotic effect is real and well documented. The anti-parasitic activity is real in the lab and probably real in humans, but I wouldn't use pumpkin seeds as your primary treatment strategy for a confirmed parasitic infection. Let your doctor handle that part. All right, let's get practical, because I've had this conversation enough times now that I know the first question after "That's interesting, Doc" is always okay, but how many do I actually eat? The research clusters around 30 grams per day. That's about 1 ounce, or roughly a small handful. For context, that's about 2 tablespoons. In most of the clinical trials I've mentioned, that's the target range. More is not better here. This is not a "if some is good, more is better" situation. Now you might be wondering, what's actually better, raw or roasted? If we're talking about keeping the nutrients intact, raw wins. Heat, especially above 170 degrees Celsius, starts to oxidize those unsaturated fats, which is not ideal if your goal is heart health. Vitamin E also starts to break down with heat. That said, if you like a little toastiness, you can absolutely roast them lightly at home. Just keep it gentle, around 160 degrees in the oven for 15 to 20 minutes. What I would avoid are the heavily salted, deep-fried store-bought versions, because at that point you're canceling out a lot of the benefit and adding a sodium load you really don't need. Another question people ask a lot is, should you eat them with the shell or without it? Honestly, both are fine. With the shell, you get more fiber and that satisfying crunch a lot of people enjoy. Shelled pumpkin seeds, or pepitas, are easier to mix into foods without changing the texture too much, so it really comes down to what works better for you. So how do you actually add them into your day without making it complicated? There are a lot of easy ways. You can toss a handful into your morning Greek yogurt, add them to salads, mix them into overnight oats, or blend them into a smoothie. And by the way, once they go into a blender, they basically disappear, which is great if you have a picky eater at home. You can also make your own trail mix or just eat them straight out of the bag as a snack. And finally, when's the best time to eat them? If you're mainly eating them for sleep, about 2 hours before bed with a small carbohydrate is a smart option. If your goal is more about blood sugar or cardiovascular support, having them with a meal is probably the easiest and most practical approach. And for prostate health, timing doesn't seem to matter nearly as much. What matters more is being consistent rather than watching the clock. And here, I want to pause for a moment because this part matters more than most YouTube videos make it sound. When people hear that pumpkin seeds are healthy, the next thought is usually, great, so the more I eat, the better. But that's not really how it works. 1 ounce, about 28 grams, has around 160 to 170 calories. That's not outrageous, but it's not nothing either. So if you're trying to manage your weight, the idea is not to just pile them on top of everything else like they don't count. They should replace another snack, not become an extra one. This is where people sometimes get tripped up. They hear healthy and assume it means unlimited. There's also something else worth knowing before you start eating them every day. Because of the fiber and fat content, they can cause bloating, gas, or digestive discomfort, especially if you add them too quickly. So instead of jumping straight into a full serving, it's smarter to start smaller, maybe around 15 grams, and work your way up to 30 grams over a couple of weeks. Your gut needs time to adjust too. Now there's one warning here that I think is especially important. If you take certain medications, this is not something you want to ignore. For example, if you're on blood thinners like warfarin, the vitamin K, and some of the platelet-related effects of these seeds could interfere. If you take blood pressure medication, the pressure-lowering effect may stack on top of that and bring your numbers down more than expected. And if you take lithium, this one deserves even more attention because pumpkin seeds may increase lithium levels by improving renal reabsorption. And no, I'm not saying this to scare you. These are real interactions. So if any of that applies to you, it's worth bringing up with your doctor before making pumpkin seeds part of your routine. And if your doctor isn't familiar with the lithium interaction, which honestly does happen, there are case reports in the literature documenting it. Another important point is kidney stones. Pumpkin seeds are moderately high in oxalates. So if you have a history specifically of calcium oxalate kidney stones, and I do mean specifically because not all kidney stones are the same, you've probably already been told to moderate high oxalate foods. In that case, keep your portions reasonable and stay well hydrated. And finally, even though it doesn't always get mentioned enough, allergies matter too. Seed allergies are real. So if you already know you react to seeds like sesame, sunflower, or flax, it's a good idea to check with your allergist before adding pumpkin seeds to your regular routine. So there you go. 5 minutes ago, you might have thought pumpkin seeds were just something you scoop out and throw away every Halloween. Now you know they've got peer-reviewed evidence behind sleep improvement, blood pressure regulation, blood sugar control, prostate symptom relief, and gut health, all from something that costs about $4 a pound at any grocery store. My personal take? If I had to name one single food that the average American is most systematically under-eating relative to its health value, pumpkin seeds might be it. I'll probably get pushback on that. Fine. Tell me in the comments. Speaking of the comments, are you already eating these? Have you noticed any of the benefits I mentioned? Or are you one of the people who's been throwing them away and is now mildly upset about that? I read every comment, not just the first 10, so drop it down there. If you found this useful, share it with someone who needs it. The like button helps this get in front of more people. And subscribe if you want more content like this. We cover functional nutrition, evidence-based preventive medicine, and occasionally I rant about things in the healthcare system that frustrate me. So there's something for everyone. I'll see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves out there.